In a world where appearances often decide a person's worth, a maid walked into a boardroom, unaware that her entire life was about to change. Surrounded by wealthy executives in sharp suits, she stood silently, holding a piece of paper she was never meant to touch. With mocking laughter, one of the men pointed at her and demanded, "Translate this!" The room filled with smirks, expecting her humiliation. But what they didn't know was that beneath her simple uniform lay an untold story, a hidden brilliance, and a strength that would not only silence the laughter, but leave everyone speechless forever. The city's financial district sparkled every morning with glass towers, polished marble floors, and the scent of wealth hanging in the air. It was a world built on power, privilege, and prestige. And yet, tucked inside that glittering world was a woman who, at first glance, seemed invisible. Her name was Maya. She wore the same crisp blue uniform every day, her white apron neatly tied, and her footsteps so quiet that the executives barely noticed her presence. She was the maid, the one who served coffee, cleaned up after meetings, and ensured the boardrooms looked immaculate for the people who never once stopped to ask her name. What no one knew, however, was that Maya was far from ordinary. Beneath her quiet demeanor was a woman carrying the weight of two jobs, struggling to care for her younger brother who was confined to a wheelchair. Every dollar mattered, every hour of work was a sacrifice, and every day felt like a battle she had to win just to survive. Maya had dreams once. She had been a brilliant student, fluent in multiple languages, excelling in literature and history. But when tragedy struck her family, those dreams had to be folded away. She worked as a maid because it was the only job available, and the world rarely offered second chances to women like her. Still, she carried herself with quiet dignity. She listened more than she spoke, and in the silence, she absorbed everything around her. Little did anyone know that her hidden skills, the very things she had once buried under the weight of survival, would soon rise to the surface in the most unexpected place, the boardroom of the very company where she was ignored every single day. That morning began like any other. Maya arrived early, quietly moving through the gleaming halls of the skyscraper, her hands carrying trays of coffee and files she wasn't supposed to read but couldn't help noticing. The executives, dressed in sharp suits and expensive watches, didn't acknowledge her presence. For them, she was part of the furniture, unnoticed, invisible, replaceable. But in the boardroom, something unusual was happening. A group of foreign investors had arrived, their documents filled with text written in a language most of the executives couldn't decipher. They spoke with calm confidence, knowing the balance of power was in their favor. The senior executives shifted nervously in their chairs, their usual arrogance dampened by the sudden realization that they were ill-prepared. As the tension thickened, one of the top managers, a man known for his arrogance and sharp tongue, spotted Maya standing near the corner, tray in hand. With a smirk, he held up one of the documents and said, almost mockingly, "Hey, translate this." The room chuckled. They expected nothing. To them, Maya was just the maid, someone who wiped their tables and fetched their drinks. The idea that she could contribute anything of value was laughable. But as Maya looked at the document, her heart raced. The characters on the page were not foreign to her. They were familiar, etched into her memory from the years she had spent studying before life had forced her into this job. She hesitated, torn between fear of humiliation and the urge to prove that she was more than what they believed. The executive's laughter grew louder, and the man leaned back smugly, convinced that Maya would stumble, that she would shrink under the spotlight. But slowly, carefully, Maya began to read. Her soft voice filled the room, translating each line with precision, confidence, and fluency that silenced the laughter instantly. For the first time, every eye in the room turned toward her, not as a maid, but as someone who possessed knowledge they desperately needed. The executives exchanged stunned glances. Some looked embarrassed, others impressed, and a few even uncomfortable, as though Maya's skill had exposed the fragile walls of their arrogance. The man who had mocked her sat frozen, his smirk wiped clean. He had intended to humiliate her, but instead, she had turned the tables. She wasn't just reading words, she was revealing her hidden power. Yet the room wasn't entirely on her side. Whispers filled the air, some questioning how a maid could possibly know such things, others doubting whether they could trust her translation. The investors, however, nodded approvingly, recognizing accuracy when they heard it. And in that moment, the balance of power shifted. Maya had unintentionally placed herself at the center of a storm, one that would either change her life forever or remind her of the cruel walls society built to keep people like her in their place. The silence that followed Maya's translation was heavy, almost suffocating. For years she had walked these halls unseen, dismissed as nothing more than a maid. But now, in this moment, every eye was glued to her, and the weight of that attention pressed down like a storm. The lead executive, the same man who had mocked her, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. His face, once glowing with arrogance, was now pale. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected her. The investors leaned forward, intrigued, asking Maya to continue. Their questions came quickly, layered with nuance and subtlety. And to everyone's astonishment, she answered with confidence, translating complex terms, explaining context, and even pointing out areas in the document that were vague or misleading. The boardroom of seasoned professionals, men who had built empires and flaunted wealth, suddenly realized they were out of their depth, and the person saving them wasn't one of their own. It was the woman they had overlooked, belittled, and paid to clean their messes. But just as admiration began to flicker in the room, the man who had started it all slammed his hand on the table. His pride was wounded, and for people like him, pride was everything. "Enough!" he barked, trying to regain control. His voice quivered, betraying the unease beneath his anger. He accused Maya of showing off, of trying to embarrass the company, in front of its guests. His words dripped with venom, his tone a desperate attempt to reclaim dominance. For him, Maya's brilliance wasn't proof of her intelligence. It was a threat to the hierarchy he thrived on, but the investors weren't. Fooled, they interrupted him sharply, dismissing his excuses, and praised Maya instead. They insisted she remain in the room, refusing to continue discussions without her input. The other executives shifted nervously, trapped between two worlds. The old one, where status dictated value, and this new reality, where skill and knowledge could no longer be ignored. Some avoided eye contact altogether, while others looked at Maya with something unfamiliar: respect. For Maya, the moment was dizzying. She had wanted nothing more than to keep her head down, to survive quietly in a world that refused to see her worth. And now, against all odds, she had been thrust into the spotlight, not by choice, but by her undeniable brilliance. The humiliation that had been meant for her had boomeranged back, striking the man who tried to belittle her. The room's power, dynamics had flipped, and there was no going back. Maya's heart pounded in her chest. For the first time in years, she felt something she had almost forgotten: the raw, unshakable certainty of her own value. When the meeting finally ended, the atmosphere in the boardroom was nothing like it had been at the start. The arrogance, the smug laughter, the dismissive glances, they were all gone. In their place was an uneasy silence, broken only by the murmurs of praise for Maya. The investors approached her directly, thanking her for saving what could have been a disastrous misunderstanding. They didn't care about her uniform, her job title, or where she came from. All they saw was a woman whose intelligence had outshined everyone else in the room. One of them even asked for her contact details, suggesting she could be a valuable consultant for future international deals. But Maya didn't answer right away. Her hands still trembled as she held the translated document, her mind replaying everything that had just happened. For years, she had carried the weight of invisibility, believing that blending into the background was the safest way to survive. Yet here she was, standing in a position of undeniable recognition. The man who had mocked her sat in the corner, humiliated, unable to meet anyone's eyes. His downfall wasn't loud. It was quiet, suffocating. The more he tried to speak, the more irrelevant he became. For him, this was a punishment worse than any confrontation. To be ignored, stripped of his authority, while the very person he ridiculed became the center of respect. Later, when Maya walked out of that towering glass building, the city looked different. The same streets she had traveled every day to work, the same routine she had followed tirelessly, now felt transformed. She realized she had not changed in that room. She had simply been seen for who she truly was. That night, as she returned to her small apartment, she sat quietly by the window reflecting. She thought of her parents who had sacrificed everything to give her an education. She thought of the countless times she had been underestimated because of her skin color, her job, or her quiet demeanor. And she thought of how many others were still trapped in the same cycle. Brilliant minds dismissed because of prejudice. Maya's story wasn't just her own. It was a mirror to the larger injustice that countless people face every day. People who are forced to shrink themselves just to fit into a world that refuses to acknowledge their worth. But here was the truth. Worth doesn't vanish just because it's ignored. It waits, quietly, like a flame sheltered from the wind. And when the right moment comes, it burns brighter than anyone ever expected. For Maya, this moment wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming dignity. It was about proving, without a single raised voice, that knowledge and strength could dismantle prejudice. And for those watching her story unfold, the lesson was undeniable. How many brilliant voices are we silencing every day, simply because of bias? How many Mayas walk among us, unseen, unheard, waiting for the world to open its eyes? The next time we look at someone and assume their value, maybe we should pause. Maybe we should remember Maya, the maid who wasn't just a maid, but a woman who left an entire boardroom speechless.